When you hear the words, I believe, it stirs some different emotions within us. For some, as you're watching that video and he kept repeating that phrase, I believe, it kind of spurs an emotion or a sense of loyalty, sense of commitment that we have, a sense of hope that you may have in the desire to follow Jesus. And it can also kind of stir the emotion of skepticism within your life. And that was true of a guy by the name of Dr. Francis Collins. Dr. Collins was doing an internship as he prepared to go into research. He was a medical doctor, research scientist. You may have seen his face at different times. Dr. Collins is the head, or was the head of the Human Genome Task Force Research Center that began to plot the human genome. Now, I say that, and you probably know what a genome is. I did not. I had to look it up. So I figure if I didn't know it, you don't know it either, so I'm going to tell you what it is, okay? And so a genome is actually it's the human cell with a complete set of chromosomes. It's all of your DNA that's inside a single cell. Now, the reason that's important is because that cell that contains your DNA, that's what you pass on to generation after generation. Also, by mapping that cell and all the things that are in that cell, the genome within that cell, you learn predictors sometimes for different diseases and perhaps how to control some of those diseases or cure some of those diseases. And here's what they found out. Dr. Collins, who led this project, a brilliant guy, they found that in each single cell there is 3.1 billion, say that with me, 3.1 billion letters in your chromosome. That's in every single cell that you have within your body. So they mapped that out. Took him a decade or so to be able to do that. While he was doing that, he was interviewing different people in hospitals, finding about their history, about their ancestry, doing research on their cells, and he kept running into some people that to him were kind of strange people. And they kept using the words, I believe. And it bothered him. As a matter of fact, in his book, The Language of God, he said, I was annoyed by it. Because all these people, he said, he grew up in the north. His parents were both agnostic. He went to school at Michigan. He went to graduate school at Harvard, had all these degrees, had all this deal, but he really had not ever encountered people with belief before. And it bothered him that these people who were dying, terminally ill people, incurable disease, they kept talking to him and they still remained positive. They had some hope. And this one person said, well, doctor, if you can't find a cure, it's okay. I'm going to a better place anyway. That annoyed the daylights out of him. He called them the believe in spite of people around him. And he said, if faith, he writes in his book, he says, if faith was a psychological crutch, it must be a very powerful one. Now, he says that because he said, I couldn't figure these people out. He said, maybe it's a cultural thing, you know. He was doing research in North Carolina. He said, maybe it's in the South, you know. They believe chicken fried steak's good for you. And I'm saying, yes, what's wrong with that? You know, and they like grits. You know, there's something wrong with these people, according to him. And so he's looking at that and he says, maybe it's just a crutch that they have. And this is the way they're able to survive, by leaning on this crutch. But he says, why aren't these people shaking their fists at God, demanding everybody stop talking about this supposedly benevolent, loving superpower called God? They're dying and God's not answering their prayer. And yet they still have faith. They keep saying, I believe. And that is annoying. One afternoon he walked into her room. The woman was dying. He had had several conversations with her. And he was just kind of chatting with her, gaining some more information, telling about the results of some tests that they had run. And he said, how are you doing? And she said, you know, doctor, I know that this may be, this may be the end, but it's okay. And she patted his hand. It's okay. I'm going to a place that's better than this. I'll be all right, and I hope your research continues on. Maybe God will lead you to find some cures. And he said that just annoyed the daylights out of him. And she said, you know what I believe. Tell me what you believe. And Dr. Collins, in his book, Language of God, said, I looked at her, and my face turned red, and I kind of stammered, and I said, I'm not really sure. I'm not really sure. And this is his words, not mine. He said, faced with my willful blindness, like I'm not really looking, I'm not even wanting to look, there may be something there, something more, but I've never explored it. He said, faced with my willful blindness and my arrogance, I began a journey. And Dr. Collins discovered that there was something to the claims of Jesus, something that he had never considered before. He found that the claims of Jesus, as he read them in the Gospels, for the first time he picked them up, were so compelling. And as he read other evidence about Jesus, he became a follower of Jesus. And he continues to follow Jesus throughout the journey of mapping human genomes. As a matter of fact, now he is the director of the National Institute of Health. His confirmation was delayed for a while, not because his research and background were not impeccable. It was because that he had declared so firmly that he was a follower of Jesus. And there were those who said he can't have a national office if he has that prejudice behind him. But they couldn't deny the research that he had done before that. 3.1 billion letters in a cell. He discovered all that. And so he said, I never knew there was evidence until I looked. Now here's the cool thing. Jesus predicted this. And John, the writer of the biography of Jesus, the fourth biography of Jesus, helped provide some of the evidence. Jesus says, I want people to have enough evidence to believe. And John said, you know what? I can help you do that. I can help people believe just like I believe. Because at the end of the day, Christianity is not just about believing. It's not just believe and believe or have faith in faith. Faith is a part of the equation. The early followers of Jesus followed him because of what they had seen and what they had heard. There were eyewitness accounts of people who saw him do certain things, make some outrageous claims, and do some outrageous miracles that back those things up. And John encourages everyone who reads his account of Jesus to place their faith in Jesus because of what, as he says, I've seen and I've heard. In one of his letters, John, right before his death, wrote this in 1 John chapter 1, verse 1 through 3. He says, that which was from the beginning. Now, when he's talking about the beginning there, he's not talking about going back to Genesis when the earth was beginning. He's talking about the beginning when Jesus first started walking on this earth, whenever he was born, in very humble circumstances. From that point on, he says, which we have heard, which we have seen with our own eyes. He's talking about this gang, this group of guys who followed him for 3 years, observed him, walked with him, lived with him, did everything with him for 3 years. Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, all those guys that were followed around with him. And they wrote some things about him. And so what John is saying is, we've seen him. We saw him with our own eyes. We've looked at, and our hands have touched. He's talking about the resurrection. This guy who told us he's going to leave, he's going to die, and then he's going to come back, and then he's going to leave us again. We saw him die. We knew he was dead. And then he walks into our midst. And besides that, then he said he was going to leave again, and he did. He ascended right in front of us. He said, we've touched him. We knew he was real. We've seen this situation. And he says, this we proclaim concerning the word of life. Talking about Jesus. The life appeared, and we've seen it and testified to it. And we proclaim to you the eternal life which was with the Father and has appeared to us. He's talking about the person of Jesus. And then he goes on to say this, and we proclaim to you what we've seen and heard so that you also may have fellowship with us. And our fellowship was with the Father and with his Son. That's John's way of saying, look, hey guys, I'm just a simple man. My father was a fisherman. I was a fisherman. And then Jesus came along And man, he just turned my life, he turned the trajectory of my life completely all around. And I learned by walking with him, I learned by doing life with him, that he was God who came to earth in the form of a person. And after 3 years, I was with him every single day. And he became my rabbi, he became my savior, he became my best friend. He's Jesus. And he says, I'm just telling you what I saw and what I heard. Well, John goes on and he outlives all of his friends. He's the last of the 12 who followed Jesus and with him every day. And I think some of his friends said, hey, you need to write about this. You know, Matthew wrote about this. He wrote a biography of Jesus. Mark, who traveled with Peter, he wrote some of those accounts. I think you need to write some also. Luke has just come out with this biography of Jesus. I think you need to write about Jesus' life also. So John sits down with his pen and his paper, and he begins to write about who Jesus was. And he says, you know, basically Jesus was saying, I want to give you evidence to believe. And John's going to say, I'm going to write things out so that you will have evidence to believe. And so he writes the fourth and last biography of Jesus. We call it the Gospel of John. Now, here's the most important thing, perhaps. John is not content, listen to me, John is not content just to tell us what happened. John has an agenda, and he's honest enough to tell us about his agenda right up front. He wants something to happen in your life as a result of reading his account of Jesus' life. He wants something to happen in my life, and he wants everyone to interact with the Son of God through how he saw him. So he spells out for him, and this is what he says. He says, now Jesus did many what? Other what? Let's read this together, right? Now, Jesus did many other signs in the presence of the disciples, which are not written in this book. Stop for just a second. In other words, what he's saying, he goes on to say, the world's libraries couldn't contain all the things that Jesus did while he was here on earth. So what I've done is I've taken some of the accounts, some of the things that I saw, some of the things that I heard, some of the things I've experienced, and I've organized them and put them together so that you might understand that he did lots of other things, but I wrote these specific things for purpose, all right? Here's the purpose, he says, go on. But these are written so that you may what? Believe. Let's read the rest of that. That Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. That's John's agenda, all right? He selected certain accounts of Jesus so that you would have enough evidence that you would be able to believe. Not totally everything that he's done. He's not going to overwhelm you, but here's some things. Jesus made some outrageous claims, and here's some outrageous signs and miracles that he did that back up those claims so that you can understand who he was. And that's my whole reason for writing. I want you to have life. I want you to be able to believe and have life in his name. And he says, I've done my best to lay this out for you so that my experience can become your experience, that you might experience life with the leader and forgiver of my life. And so John says, and he knows, just like I think many of you know, that when you live this life with the assumption that there's something beyond this life, you live this life in a very different way. When you understand that Jesus died for you, that he resurrected, and there's something more than just this life, there's eternal life now, there's eternal life forever. When you live life with that in the back of your mind, with that as your assumption, with that as your viewpoint, there's something beyond this life. You live this life in a very different way. Now, this morning we're going to explore one of the events that John says led him to believe that Jesus was more than just a man, that he was God in the flesh. It's found in John chapter 4, starting with verse 46. If you have your Bibles, turn to that. If not, we've got the words on the screen. It says, once more he, meaning Jesus, visited Cana. Now, before you read any further, can you think of anything, those of you who are Bible scholars, or at least have heard some stories about Jesus, can you think of anything that Jesus did in Cana of Galilee? Anybody? He turned the water into wine. Now, if you're a Baptist, you don't want to admit that that's in the Bible, okay? because you may have some trouble with it, all right? But he basically says, hey, this is where it says he turned the water into wine, and there was a certain royal official whose son lay what? Sick, and lives in Capernaum, all right? So here's what we know. Jesus had been at Cana. He went elsewhere. He began doing some other miracles. He began doing some speaking, and he comes back to Cana again. And so this guy has a son, and he's in Capernaum. Now, there's some important details that you need to know. Capernaum, where this royal official lives, is about an 8-hour walk from Cana. So there's some distance, at least in the ancient world, that lay between Cana and Capernaum. And so this guy is going to have to go on an 8-hour trip walking, or it may have been about 4 hours, maybe 5 hours, if it was by horse or by chariot, if he had an entourage with him. And we also see that he was a royal official. So that means he's going to have to take a journey. He's going to have to leave his son that's sick to go down to where Jesus is. Now, he's a royal official. He's an aristocrat. He's a nobleman. That's what some versions say. That means probably he is a Sadducee. In the first century, there were two, I don't really want to call them political parties, but basically they were. There were two parties. There was the Pharisees and the Sadducees. The Pharisees was meticulous in their desire to keep the law of God, the 10 Commandments and all the 672 other laws that there were. They wanted to keep those laws meticulously, and they especially didn't want you messing them up. So they drew little fences around those laws so that you didn't transgress those laws. Laws upon laws upon laws. It got to be a really confusing thing. But the Pharisees, most of you would have liked in some ways, because they liked God. They wanted to know his word, and they read it very, very much. And the Pharisees, for the most part, believed that God could resurrect the dead. Resurrection of the dead was something that they weren't sure there was exactly how he was going to do that, but they believed in the resurrection of the dead. The Sadducees were the other party. The Sadducees were generally the more educated, secularly concerned. They believed that God wound this universe up. Everything was predetermined ahead of time. And so you were what you are when you were born. You know, by fate, it determined when you were born, who you married, how many kids you had, what caste you were in life, what your financial situation in life is going to be. It was all predetermined, and it's already set. So because of that, listen, this is the important part. You didn't ask God for anything, because he's already set everything up. He's not a personal God. It's just going to happen, because fate dictates everything. But there's a day that changed all that. And I dare say probably a day changed you also. There's some time in your life that you had all this all figured out. You had your own little viewpoint of what God was like, and suddenly something interrupted that. Maybe it was a son or a daughter or a wife or you that got sick. Maybe it was some other tragedy that intervened into your life. And all of a sudden, all those things that you thought you knew so well just gets pushed to the side, because this day, this royal official is not just a Sadducee, he's a desperate father. Isn't it interesting that with all of our intellect and all of our pride and all of our certainty sometimes gets pushed to the periphery when someone that we love is suffering? And on this day, this royal official, this aristocrat, this is what you need to know. He's scared that his son's going to die. And when this man heard that Jesus had arrived from Galilee, from Judea, and arrived in Cana of Galilee, he decided to go with him. 3 to 4 hours on horseback or chariot. Now, I have a theory. Don't take this too seriously, but I have a theory, supposition. I think here's what happened. When he heard, he heard they had never met Jesus. He'd never met Jesus. But when he heard all these stories about Jesus, when his wife heard that Jesus was coming north through the region of Galilee where they were, she said to her husband, I don't care whether you think everything's determined or not. You go get that guy and bring him back here. Our son's sick. You ever had your wife stick her finger in your chest saying, you got to do this? Can I get an amen from the men on that? If I don't, I just know that you're henpecked and you're not going to say a word to be able to say anything, okay? All right, but that happens, right? Your wife wants something and you better figure out how to deliver on it, okay? So she says, go get him, and he gulps, and he's got a decision to make. Do I leave my son here sick, dying son? I may never see him again. Do I send a servant? Besides, are these just rumors about this guy supposedly being a miracle worker? We're not sure even where the guy's from or where he was born. So verse 47, it says, when he heard that Jesus had come from Judea to Galilee, he went and, tell me the next word. Doesn't really capture the nuance of that particular Greek word, begged, but it has the idea that he's not just saying, please come, my son is dying. But there's this over and over pleading. He forgets about his dignity, his position in society, his theology. He forgets his worldview. My son is dying. Can you help me? What will it take to get you to my son's bedside? Some of you have been there. Had a guy tell me last spring that the first prayer he ever prayed was out of desperation. He said, I wasn't even sure that there was a God. So he said, I said this. I said, to whom it may concern. First service laughed a lot harder at that than you did. But it is kind of funny, isn't it? I don't know whether there's a God or not. To whom it may concern, oh, benevolent, whatever you are, can you help me? And then he said it got more desperate. Please, please, I just need to know something is real. Please. And that's where we get. And you may be there also. Now, what Jesus says next may seem very insensitive, but it's only because our English translations sometimes don't catch are inadequate to convey some of the nuances. And so I've translated it from Greek into Oki for you this morning, okay? So he said, Jesus literally says, Jesus said to him, unless you see signs and wonders, you will never believe. Now, it sounds like that Jesus is getting on to the guy, but really he's talking to everybody there. It's a second person plural, just the word you, but we forget. So I've translated Oki just so you can understand. All y'all, unless all y'all see signs and wonders, y'all never going to believe, all right? So he's saying this to everybody, and it's not an indictment. He's just saying the truth. They don't know about him. They don't know who Jesus is. He's making some outrageous claims. He's already said, I'm God's son. I'm God in the flesh. And people are going, whoa. And so he backs those up with signs and wonders. As a matter of fact, John takes 7 specific signs in his biography of Jesus to describe that. And this is one of them. And this is a unique one that Jesus does. And he says, unless all y'all see signs and wonders, you'll never believe. And that's true, because in the first century, they had no idea, no testimony as to who God was. And so Jesus is going to do something outrageous. And I think it's kind of interesting because, Jesus is going to say, something's going to have to convince you to believe. Something's going to have to happen to convince you or accept my claims. And unless I do something that convinces you, because seeing is believing, I'm not expecting anyone to simply have faith in faith. I want you to understand that this is real. So Jesus decides to give the crowd something to talk about. I think he says, if we're going to do a wonder, let's make it so wonderful that people talk about it. And you know what? For 2,000 years, they're still talking about this miracle. It was pretty wonderful what he did. It's pretty outrageous. But it was a part of the claim, the evidence that Jesus is laying out so that you and I can understand years, decades, centuries later that he is the Christ, the Son of the living God. And so people still talking about today. It's a unique miracle. Now, the official, verse 49 says this. The official pleaded, Lord, please come now before my little boy dies. Do you hear the desperation in this man's voice? I mean, why did he make the trip? Why did he risk walking away from his son that was dying, leaving his wife and family to care for it, and go talk to this man he really didn't know anything about? Rumors, stories of what Jesus had been doing, holiness with human hands. And so, listen to me, in this guy's mind, he has two options. Option number one is this. I can go and I can talk to Jesus. If I think he's real, I can have him come with me, go back to my son, and he'll be healed. Option two, he doesn't come and my son dies. Two options. If he doesn't come, my son's going to die. Option two, he comes with me and he's able to perform some sort of miracle and my son lives. Those are two options. Jesus knows what's going on. And I think he smiles about this time because Jesus says, no, you got it wrong. There are three options that you have. There's a third option. And the one that Jesus presents is one that kind of sets, I believe, a pathway for us even today. And so Jesus says this third option. And in presenting it, Jesus kind of asks him to do what he's asked other people to do ever since this time with this royal official. Jesus asked this royal official to trust him, Jesus, based on the testimony of other people. If he had asked him to entrust his son based on stories told about him. And Jesus turns to the nobleman, and verse 50 it says this. Then Jesus told him, once again, this is kind of needs a little bit of updating for us to understand it. He says, go. It's not like, go, get out of here. Your son will live. It's more like, go, just meander off. It's okay. Your son's going to live. Go do some shopping, get some flowers for the missus, meander your way back home. It's okay. He's going to live. What would you do in that guy's situation? Please, Jesus, come. Jesus says, no, I'm not going to come, but go. You can trust me. It's going to be all right. You can pick up some flowers for your wife who's stressed out at home. You know, bring her favorite lamb or something like that. I don't know. And he says, it's just saying, you know, you don't have to hurry. Nothing to worry about. Your son's going to live. I'm a dad. I'm married. I've been around my kids when they were sick. Can you imagine that? Your wife had said, go get this guy and bring him home with you, right? And Jesus says, just go on home. It's okay. I'm not coming with you. Son's going to be fine. I think he's saying, wait, time out. You want me to go home without you? No way, Jose. I'm not doing that. Hey, I had two options. One is you don't come, son dies. You come, son lives, you know. I know he had an entourage with him. I think he kind of looked around to his bodyguards and he had a signal already prearranged. We're going to pick him up, bodily carry him, put him in my chariot. We're going to kidnap him and take him back to Capernaum to heal my son. But we're going to make this work. It's going to work one way or the other. And so he looks at his bodyguard and he's thinking, my son's life is at risk and you want me to do a little shopping, a little meandering around, getting flowers for the missus, and then go back home without you? That's not a good option. You don't know what the little missus is going to say about this whole situation. So what Jesus is saying is, trust me. Trust me. Trust me. And that's why this miracle is so brilliant. These aren't random acts of kindness that Jesus is doing. This is Jesus painting a picture, laying out a path, again, that men and women will be walking for the next 2,000 years or more. This is the path that we walk right now because we're in the future. This is the story of a lifetime reduced down to a day. Listen, we are asked every single day of our life to take Jesus at his word, based on the word of other people, based on the testimony of other people. We are asked to entrust our lives to Jesus. We are asked to entrust our health to Jesus. We are asked to entrust our future to Jesus. We are asked to entrust our finances to Jesus. We are asked to entrust our children and our grandchildren, our healthy children, our sick children to Jesus, based on the words and testimony of people who knew him and who had seen him. That means that we are to go about our days at times with unanswered prayers, prayers that we have breathed out, confident that there's something about Jesus, that he is in fact who he has claimed to be and demonstrated himself to be based upon the testimony of somebody else. And we've seen people do that. You've seen people, and you marvel at their lives. You marvel at their belief sometimes in spite of. People who have burdens who just don't go away. Sicknesses that won't be healed. Financial conditions that won't turn around. Husbands who won't come home. Kids who won't come home. Parents who act like children. We've seen people carry these things, burdens on their backs. And yet, we've seen some people that there's still a joy in their life. There's a peace. There's a confidence. And it's inspiring, but it's also intimidating. And it's why Dr. Francis Collins came to faith. And it may be why you come to faith as well, or did come to faith. And you know what this means for some? Maybe most of you. For those of you who are following Jesus, there's that nagging, unanswered prayer. There's the thing that God doesn't seem to do, doesn't want to do. He won't do. There's that thing, and yet you continue to serve. Yet you continue to listen. Yet you continue to give. Yet you continue investing your lives in people around you. And you do understand that while you are being faithful, and every single night you pray, and prayers are repeated over and over, and we're tempted to wonder in that time, where is God? There are people watching you. Do you realize that? Probably not. There are people to see how you handle that. Do you know that what God is doing in the lives of people around you because of your faithfulness? Do you realize that's going on? Probably not. And do you know that perhaps, or maybe who, perhaps in a day or a month or a year or 5 years from now may be placing their faith in Jesus because of what they see you believing in spite of. Your belief in spite of. This story is our lives condensed to a day. So the nobleman, can you imagine? He's stunned. It's like either you're coming with me or you're not coming with me. And Jesus is saying, no, go. You can take your time getting home without me, don't worry. And this nobleman who, with his entourage, who has come and who has not a single day in his life begged for anything in his life, all he's done is command other people to do for him in his life, who has humiliated himself in the eyes of other people around him. Please come! Because he's so desperate. He's got a decision to make. Does he trust? Does he shake his fist at him? Does he walk away in despair? What does he do? And verse 50 says this. He exhales and he makes a decision that affects all of us today. And this is not an exaggeration. It changed the trajectory of his life, and it's changed the trajectory of several other lives. It says, the man believed. He believed what Jesus said and started home. He started on his way home. In other words, he decided, I don't know all the answers, but I trust him. I've met him. I've experienced him in some way. I hear the testimony of other people. So I'm going to take a step, and I'm going to step towards belief. I don't know everything, but there's enough evidence there that I can step towards belief. And so he decides to trust Jesus. And he steps out, and he starts heading home. Verse 51 says this. It says, while the man was on his way, he's going back. He's trusting. He doesn't know what's going to happen when he gets back, when he's on the way. Some of his servants met him, and they met him halfway. They didn't come halfway just to give him an update. They came to tell him this. Your son is alive, and he's well. Can you imagine the relief that went over that guy? I mean, Sadducees were not known for their dancing. He may have broke out into a dance, all right? He may have rejoiced pretty hard at this situation. And he believes. And so he says in verse 52, this is what's cool. He says, when he inquired as to the time when his son got better, they said, yesterday, at 1 in the afternoon, and the fever left him. Guess when Jesus said, go home. Go, trust me, at 1 in the afternoon. And verse 53 says this, the father realized that was the very time that Jesus had told him, your son will live. And he and his entire household, would you say the next word with me? Believed in Jesus. They believed in Jesus. So he left, and there's a phrase that we sometimes use as followers of Jesus. He left and he walked home by faith, not by sight. As he walked home, he didn't know exactly what was going to happen. He had not had sight yet. It was not physically in front of him yet that his son was healed. And so he's walking home. It's by faith that he's trusting Jesus, and soon his faith becomes sight. It's a phrase that was coined by the Apostle Paul in 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 7, where he says, for we walk by faith and not by sight. There's a joke that I use. It's not very funny, but I'll tell it to you anyway, that whenever our family meets together, this is just, I'm telling you it's a joke ahead of time so you can laugh and make me feel good, okay? So our family gets together, and we're out eating someplace, and they bring our food to us. I always say, I'll pray. My food's not here, so I can pray by faith. You can't pray because it would be by sight, all right? So not very funny, is it? But I always hope it gets a laugh at the family table. My grandkids laugh. Does that count? But our life is to be lived walking by faith, not by sight, by trusting God. We don't always know all the answers. Amen? Do you know all the answers? No. But we act like we do, don't we? And we don't have to know all the answers. We just have to know who is the answer. And by placing our trust in him, then we walk not by sight, but we walk by faith. We live by faith. Now, here's what that means. Let me say what it doesn't mean first. It doesn't mean I live by wishful thinking. It doesn't mean I hope what I hope is real. I'm just wishing that this would be my wish. I wish upon a star, that sort of thing. It's based on something. It means living every single day of your life as if what Jesus says is true. If what his claims are, that they are really real. And friends, that is so important, because that is the thing. This living by faith, not by sight, is what changes everything. It's what changed the world. Christianity was born in the backwater of the Roman Empire. Nobody paid any attention to it. But within 100 years, it had taken over the empire. It had made such an impact that they were trying to kill all the Christians. And before long, they submitted to Christianity because there was something about those crazy Christians. Christianity changed the world. And it wasn't because everybody got their prayers answered. It wasn't because everybody got everything they wanted. You know what happens when you get whatever you want all the time? What would happen if you gave your kids everything they wanted all the time? Well, I do that. Well, then you got some pretty spoiled kids then. And they're probably giving you trouble. And God doesn't treat us that way either. He doesn't give us everything we want. There's some things that are just not good for us, so he says no at times. And the reason Christianity shaped the Western culture is not because everybody got what they wanted and what they asked for. What shaped the Western culture was the gospel. Right before Jesus was crucified, he says, this is also in John's biography, he spends a whole bunch of time on just the last week of his life there. And in John 13, He's already told them, I'm leaving. I'm going to die. I'm going to come back, and then I'm going to leave again. And they're just, oh, we can't live life without you. It's okay. You can trust me. You can trust me. And he says, here's your byword. Here's the new commandment for you. And if you will live this way, despite whatever else is going on around you, things will be different. He says this, John 13:34. He says, a new command I give you, and you're going to love it. Love what? As I have loved you, so you must love one another. In other words, there's a behavior that goes along with this belief. As I trust God in spite of things, and I begin to invest my life in other people, as I love other people, there's a difference it's going to make. It goes on to say this, by this all men will know that you are my disciples if you gossip about one another. If you make fun of each other. No, if you want to say it with me? Love one another. By this, all people will know who I claim to be and that you're my follower by how you treat one another. And listen to me, the worse things are for you, the brighter your light's going to shine. So Jesus would basically say, I'm sorry, but I'm not always going to say yes. And your good Heavenly Father's not always going to say yes. But follow me and love as I have loved, and you will be ambassadors of a unique lifestyle that will change the world. And that's what changed the world. And it's what changes a city. It's what changes a culture. It's what changes families. To walk by faith, to live by faith, is to live with the confidence that God is who he claimed to be, as revealed to us by his Son. And the implications are staggering. In fact, this is what is probably most inspiring for many of us. To walk by faith is to live with the confidence that your faith and your sacrifice and your commitment and your generosity are not in vain, because they are anchored in the commitment of something real and someone real. It's living, it's walking by faith that causes someone like Francis Collins to pay attention and to pause and to wonder. It's your walking by faith and living as if Jesus is who he claims to be. It's your lifestyle, trusting in Jesus to the degree that it causes people to pause and wonder, why are they like that? How in the world can they have peace despite all this stuff that's going on around them? Because your light shines right on it. And it's been this way from the very, very beginning. And this miracle, I've called this miracle the remote control miracle. Jesus was not present. He just said, okay, go on home. Set's on. Your son's alive. And this guy trusted and he lived. Now, one thing more and we'll be done, all right? Look up here for just a second. Being certifiably dead and coming to life is a big thing. You agree with that? Yeah. And when Jesus appeared to people after the resurrection, it was shocking. A lot of people doubted. Most everybody ran at the cross. And yet he shows up and the women say he's alive. And they're going, whoa, I don't know about that. And some doubted. Even when they saw him, they doubted. One of the guys was a guy by the name of Thomas. He's earned a name because of all the stories, maybe the skeptic. It's okay that all of us have some skepticism and doubts in it. Thomas the who? Doubter. Doubting Thomas, we call him often in the Bible. One of the group, one of the 12 apostles. And Thomas said, man, I won't believe it until I see his hands and I put my fingers in the nail prints in his hands. And Jesus appeared to him and he said, here's the hand, stick your finger in it. And Thomas said, oh, help my unbelief. And Thomas, Jesus says, you believe because I'm standing here in front of you. Seeing is believing. Seeing is believing. Then Jesus says something very, very important, I think, to everyone in this room. It's what our faith hangs on. It's what our belief hangs on. It's important to you. It's important to me. It's important to my children and my grandchildren and everyone I meet. John 20, verse 29 says this, blessed are those who have not seen and what? And yet believe. And yet believe. And so to Jesus' followers, he is saying, blessed are you who in the future will believe based upon the testimonies of these men who saw, and they wrote their accounts. Because what you have seen and heard, people in the future will believe. And the same is true now. You are a living testimony. And as you walk around this earth, and as you walk by faith and not by sight, when that belief comes out, your light shines bright. And people take notice. They may scratch their head. They may not ask you a question at all. But they might ask other people questions about it. And it begins a possibility for them to experience the same life that you experience if you will do that also. John is saying, I don't want you just to know something. I want you to experience what I've experienced. I want you to see what I saw through my eyes. But more important than anything else, I want you to do something. I want you to believe and have life. I want you to see what I saw and hear what I heard. And these things are written to you that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing that you may have life in his name. That no matter what life throws at you, you can still have life in the midst of it. So, here's the question. Do you believe? Do you believe? There are many of you in this room can say with confidence, I believe that Jesus is the Son of God. And he's my Savior. And I will follow him no matter what is going on around me. And friends, that conviction will lead you to life. It led Dr. Francis Collins to believe and experience life. And if you're here this morning and you're just not sure whether you believe, that's okay too. But what I'd love to ask you to do is the same thing as the reason John wrote that biography of Jesus, is to do some investigating. Look at his claims and see what Jesus actually said. Look at how he backed up those outrageous claims that he made. The evidence is there. Then you have to take a step and trust, because once that evidence is presented and you're able to look through it, Jesus says, come, not go, but come follow me. And that'll be the step that you need to take. So I'm wondering this morning, there's someone here that can hear Jesus' call that says, come follow me. And you're ready to take that step. You're ready to experience that life that Jesus has to offer. If that's true, we'd love for you to come as we stand together and sing this morning.